Welcome back, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer, because we're tackling what is arguably the single most vital geopolitical question of 2026. Now, if you've been doom scrolling the news lately, it probably feels like the whole world is on the brink, right? Like these regional conflicts are just going to spill over into some massive global war. But when we actually dig into the latest structural intelligence and net assessment data, a completely different and frankly fascinating picture emerges. So let's cut through all that noise, look strictly at the numbers, and figure out exactly how the global system is actually adapting to conflict. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Fusion or replumbing. 2. The Interceptor Magazine War. 3. The Missing Piece Guarantor. 4. A two-tier ocean. And 5. Pricing the future. Okay, let's just get right into it. Section 1. Fusion or replumbing. So, is this World War III? I mean, this is the question totally dominating media headlines right now. And with multiple regional wars overlapping, constricted straits, major powers acting and reacting, the alarmism makes sense. The popular narrative is that this axis of adversaries is forming and pushing us straight into World War III. But, as we're going to see, the actual observable data paints a very, very different reality. Okay, let's dive into this. The myth being sold out there is fusion, this idea that separate regional theaters are basically merging into a single global contest with shared logistics and one big escalation ladder. But the reality, at least according to the data, is something called replumbing. What this means is the military theaters are actually staying distinct. Instead of everything exploding into a world war, the essential flows of the global system, things like oil, munitions, insurance, they're simply rerouting around the damage. The system isn't breaking, it's just adapting. And the absolute most crucial piece of evidence for this? $90.66. That was the price of Brent crude oil in late July 2026. Just think about this for a second. Despite two major constricted straits, the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, despite hegemon actively at war, and despite a major oil producer getting bombed, the price didn't spike to $130 or $200 a barrel like everyone feared. It hovered right under $91. The physical trade just adapted through rerouting, dark fleets, and demand destruction. Honestly, this surprisingly low number is the ultimate, undeniable proof that the global system is successfully replumbing itself, rather than fusing into total chaos. Section 2. The Interceptor Magazine War. Just look at this stunning asymmetry. On one side, you've got an Iranian drone that costs tens of thousands of dollars and takes maybe weeks to replace if a launch site is damaged. On the other side, the U.S. answers with a Patriot interceptor costing roughly $4 million. $4 million! It's a fantastic business model for one side, and literally an unsustainable nightmare for the other. One side takes years to replace what it fires off in a single night. So deterrence isn't being degraded by actually losing battles. It's being degraded by publishing these depleted inventory numbers. And here is why this matters deeply. U.S. Patriot stockpiles fell by roughly 65% by mid-2026. Interceptors are now being rationed by choice. This creates a massive geopolitical shift because rationing silently converts a global alliance system into a triage queue. Think about it. Every interceptor fired in the Gulf is one less interceptor protecting an ally in the Indo-Pacific next year. Consequently, the U.S. war aim has had to quietly shift. Instead of trying to shoot down every cheap incoming arrow, they've moved to anti-access suppression. Basically, using munitions to attack the launch sites and sensors directly. They literally have to attack the Archer, because they simply cannot afford to keep shooting at the arrows. Section 3. The Missing Piece Guarantor. And this brilliantly illustrates the current diplomatic gridlock. 4 ceasefires attempted in just 5 months, brokered by completely different parties, and every single one either collapsed or was superseded. This isn't a fluke. It's not just bad faith or, narrative escalation. The data clearly shows us that this endless cycle of pausing and resuming is a structural problem. And that structural problem is the missing piece guarantor. See, Iran's stated condition for stopping is a rock-solid guarantee against a recurrence of aggression. But the U.S. constitutionally cannot bind a future administration to that kind of guarantee. So the mediation looks to China, but Beijing flat out declines the formal, unbounded obligation of being a security guarantor. Sure, they'll sponsor talks, but they strictly refuse to put their own military credibility on the line to enforce a peace. So diplomacy is actually operating correctly here. It's just working on an unsolvable problem. Because there's no guarantor, we really can't expect a formal peace treaty. Instead, the likely outcome is what the source calls an armistice architecture. Think back to the 1953 Korean armistice. Without a guarantor, that conflict didn't end in a signed peace. It ended in a frozen mechanical structure. And that's what we're looking at for the future in the Gulf. Monitored maritime regimes, transit fee mechanisms, standing commands. The conflict basically freezes mechanically because a permanent diplomatic solution is just out of reach. Section 4. A two-tier ocean. Now, the straits aren't actually completely closed. Instead, they've become tiered. The blockade is being priced by affiliation, not by the cargo itself. Data tracking shows Chinese crude or destined hulls passing right through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait totally unmolested, while Western-affiliated shipping is targeted or warned off. This basically acts as a discriminatory tariff, heavily penalizing Western shipping while handing a massive structural freight cost advantage directly to China. As a result, non-Western insurance and registries are stepping up and becoming the primary maritime system rather than just a shadow network. Essentially, attackers are converting their capacity to disrupt into transit fees and rent extraction. And there's this completely overlooked but absolutely fascinating detail regarding how China weathers this energy crunch. While the West worries about oil prices, China's real energy hedge is entirely on the demand side. Their massive electrified vehicle fleet acts as a strategic petroleum reserve that never depletes. Every single EV shifts their vulnerability away from imported, sea-bound oil and right onto domestic electricity. And considering China generates more than twice the electricity of the US, they can absorb a closed strait and $90 oil with total equanimity. They've structurally changed the shape of their demand. Section 5. Pricing the future. Now, what's really interesting about this prediction market data and institutional analysis is that the highest probability by far, sitting at 55%, is managed attrition. This is a long, subcatastrophic conflict defined by intermittent strikes and repeated partial ceasefires. The absolute nightmare scenario of cross-theater fusion, meaning World War III, sits all the way down at just 7%. So the markets aren't pricing in a global apocalypse here. They're pricing in a long, grinding, manageable adaptation. But just because it isn't World War III doesn't mean there aren't severe risks. While the media is totally distracted by global war headlines, the source highlights systemic risks that are completely overlooked. For instance, desalination plants are a massive, unpriced existential vulnerability in the Gulf. I mean, one attack there causes a humanitarian emergency in days. Then there's the lag effect of fertilizer and gas bottlenecks, which are inevitably going to cause severe food shocks in the global south. We're also seeing manpower become a traded commodity, with troops and engineers exchanged between sanctioned states. And, perhaps most dangerously of all, a nuclear latency cascade. Which brings us to our final thought. The real risk of 2026 isn't a sudden explosion into global war. It's the slow, quiet replumbing of the world. Think about it. If military protection from superpowers is mathematically rationed by depleted interceptor stockpiles, and if the oceans are permanently divided into a two-tier system, other nations will inevitably realize they have to protect themselves. When regional powers see that bombardment doesn't actually eliminate a rival's nuclear program, the logical next step is a cascade of proliferation. So I leave you with this question. When superpower protection is rationed and the oceans are divided into tiers, what happens to global security as 4 more states quietly achieve nuclear latency? It's a fascinating, sobering reality. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer to explore this incredible data, and I really hope this helps you read the headlines with a lot more clarity. See you next time.